as a running saw. Walter's very, very keen not to join the ERM, always backing up Mrs Thatcher on this. Lawson pushing. And so gradually you had a development of a separate policy in which the Chancellor does one thing and the Prime Minister is always arguing for the other. So it was heading for the rocks.
John Major, who'd been appointed to replace Geoffrey Howe as Foreign Secretary and who'd only been in the job 3 months, was now made Chancellor.
I think Mrs Thatcher chose Major partly for good reasons, that he was he was a rising star and he was able and he had that ability to get on with all sorts of people. He was an emollient figure. She also believed him to be a loyal part of her project, which was not really the case. I don't think he ever was a Thatcherite, but he's a good flatterer, and she believed that he was. And I think she found it easier to deal with people who were really the next generation down than the people she'd been with all the time.
Next came the first challenge to Thatcher's leadership. In December, backbencher and lifelong European Sir Anthony Mayer launched his campaign to topple the leader. Nobody else joined in and Mrs Thatcher won an easy victory, but it was another sign that there was a growing movement for change.
I'd like to say how very pleased I am with this result, and very pleased I am to have had the overwhelming support of my colleagues in the House and of people from the party in the country.
Nobody thought Anthony Mayer could be Prime Minister, least of all Anthony himself. He knew perfectly well that was not his temperament, not his style. He couldn't conceivably have done it. But just to put down a marker, in the hope that her power would be checked and controlled, it paved the way to her, in the end, being deposed. But at the time, I think all these people were doing was making themselves feel better by registering their severe discontent and concern.
If Euro enthusiasts were dejected, others were alarmed by Mrs Thatcher's intransigence over a new community charge dubbed the poll tax. It was intended to replace the old rating system and was set for full implementation by April 1990. The plans attracted widespread criticism and provoked public unrest. Detractors claimed the plans were flawed and the new tax would be expensive and more difficult to collect than the rates. But not even rioting could stop the charge being introduced.
Nothing that warrants this. The place to discuss these matters is Parliament. These people are totally against democracy.
She couldn't understand the opposition to the poll tax. She felt very strongly by then that if people were made to pay their actual share, as it were, of the costs of local government, and that they didn't like it, then the democratic process would work and that they would then go and turf out their local councils. But of course, local government is not like national government, partly because of the low turnout in local elections for a start. People are not quite that politically activated or minded. And what she didn't realise is that people would look at this and say it's an unfair tax.
By autumn 1990, Labour was averaging a lead of 13 points in the opinion polls. The mood at the Tories' annual conference was subdued. In an attempt to try and lift their spirits, Mrs Thatcher used an attack on the Liberal Democrats to tell a joke.
As for the Liberal Democrats, they were as dead as Monty Python's parrot.
It is not merely stunned, it has ceased to be, expired and gone to meet its maker.
She was trying to make the point that the Liberals were a spent force. I'm told that when she went through the first rehearsal, apparently she looked up and said, is this meant to be funny? And they said, yes, Prime Minister, it's based on the Monty Python. Really? I mean, will people laugh when they say? And they said, they really will. Oh. Well, I must say, and she tried it once again, and apparently she herself never really got the point.
The joke backfired. Tory MP Sir Ian Gow had been murdered earlier in the summer, and a by-election was subsequently held to elect his replacement. On the 19th of October, the people of Eastbourne delivered a blow to the Tories by voting in a Lib Dem with a dramatic swing of 20%.
It'll be a moment that people will remember. It'll be a moment when they remember the great hopes that so many voted for at the last election for a decent alternative to the Tories and Labour Party come alive again.
So the stage was set. The divisions within the parliamentary party over the community charge and Europe, plus bad poll ratings and rising inflation, were all fanning the flames of discontent. A potential challenger, Michael Heseltine, was waiting in the wings. Now all that was needed was a trigger, and it came from the most mild-mannered member of Thatcher's cabinet. Geoffrey Howe had accepted his dismissal from the Foreign Office, but he finally fell out with Mrs. Thatcher over the European single currency. At the end of October, while Mrs. Thatcher was at a summit in Rome, Geoffrey Howe went on television and suggested the government was not against the principle of a single currency. Mrs. Thatcher was furious.
For some reason she'd formed this view with Geoffrey, not I think when he was in the Treasury, but when he got to the Foreign Office. And from that moment on she behaved, I think, in a totally hectoring and sort of disgraceful kind of bullying manner to him. And he put up with it for 6-7 years, but eventually that was it.
When Margaret Thatcher rebutted Howe's remarks in the House of Commons and further rejected Jacques Delors' plan for Europe with a vigorous no, 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 Geoffrey Howe felt he had no option but to resign.
Geoffrey, I'm told, remonstrated with Mrs. Thatcher over her tone on Europe. She went for him in no uncertain terms. 6 hours later, he decided he'd had enough of that sort of treatment and resigned.
The fact that Margaret and I had moved so far apart from each other on central question of policy, foreign policy, European policy, and as I said in my resignation speech, that involved a conflict of loyalty. I had been loyal to Margaret, and we'd been loyal to each other for 16 years. That was a very strong feature in my mind, obviously. On the other hand, I'd been strongly in favour of a strong British position in Europe for a very long time indeed. I felt that the way we were going was threatening to destroy that British interest. That was the key feature. But we'd also drifted apart in terms of the partnership which had worked so well for so many years. The magic had gone out of the relationship. I've often said people should concentrate on our long marriage, not on our divorce.
During the first weekend of November, there was a renewed bout of leadership contest fever. Sensing the mood and applying Tory party rules, Mrs. Thatcher cleared the way for a leadership challenge, setting a date of the 15th of November for the close of nominations and the 20th of November for the first ballot. Initially, there was no firm challenge, only an atrocious by-election result.
Labour's victory in Bradford North was never in question, but the scale of it has further undermined Tory morale. Despite the Conservative candidate's attempts to put a brave face on it, it was the third largest fall in the Tory vote in a by-election since Mrs. Thatcher came to power.
Geoffrey Howe had also made it clear he would be making a speech setting out the reasons for his resignation. His announcement came in response to Mrs. Thatcher's speech following the state opening of Parliament, in which she insisted there were no significant differences between them on European policy. On the 12th of November, the Prime Minister addressed the Lord Mayor's banquet. In it, she started comparing herself to a cricketer facing hostile bowling. But, she said,
there will be no ducking the bouncers, no stonewalling, no playing for time. The bowling's going to get hit all round the ground. That's my style.
The cricketing metaphor proved a mistake, as the next day Geoffrey Howe picked up her sporting references with devastating effect.
It's rather like sending your opening batsman to the crease, only for them to find the moment the first balls are bowled that their bats have been broken before the game by the team captain.
Then he delivered the killer blow.
The time has come for others to consider their own response to the tragic conflict of loyalties with which I have myself wrestled for perhaps too long.
I decided that if one's going to resign at all, then, as people advised me, one needs to make clear people understand why one's resigning. And to make a speech in those circumstances which didn't get that across was a damp squib, as it were, would not have been a sensible thing to do. It had to make an impact, and I spelled it out as clearly as I could, but as candidly and as sadly as I could. That's why I ended up by saying I'd wrestled for so long with this conflict of loyalty.
Some of us had tried to warn her, but she hadn't hoisted it in. I think she was genuinely surprised and shocked that someone who had been such a good ally, she was suddenly, as she saw it, turned against her.
The next day, Michael Heseltine announced he would stand for the leadership. Margaret Thatcher was immediately nominated by Douglas Hurd and seconded by John Major.